It is an irony, and a tragic and difficult one, that the call to community life, being the call to love and love Christ fully, is oddly to live in a state of permanent exile. The Franciscans understood this well, having nothing but the frail paper-like walls of their friaries, often converted, as in our day at SSF Hillfield, from old cow buyers. The Lord being met at a table that stands where cattle used to slake their thirst. Exile, closure, destruction, dismissal is the journey of so many monasteries, being driven out as Jesus was as an infant and a young man, as Jesus warns the apparently eternal city of Jerusalem in Matthew 23:38. Your house is left to you desolate. The English Reformation, starting in the early 1530s, saw the death of permanence, employment and monastic service, such as at Evesham Abbey in January 1539, where the final worship was broken up by the cries of soldiers as the monks sang, "He has put down the mighty from their seats," at Vespers. But in Scotland the life just faded out under the pressure of change. It is possible to see in the heart's eye the sight of the cathedral from a boat, the great building left burning across the waters of the North Sea after a ferocious sermon by John Knox in June 1539. In the resonance of this history of exile, there is an irony of the Benedictine call not to be a gyrovague, a person who goes from house to house, but instead to be a person that risks permanence. Very challenging to us now. Where risks and lives the narrow way of commitment. However, much of the new monastic life is understanding that had developed that one should stay is an understanding that had developed that one should stay in community only so long as that stay induces growth. Otherwise, the vine of a life has to be pruned and the call becomes to one to leave community life, which is always a grieving process. Indeed, in modern lay community life, the goal is not life vows, or as Lars has called it in the past, announcing the covenant. I remember, for instance, a colleague saying in disgust, "I'm not going to get married to Lars." So what then makes us people of the covenant, when the covenant means God's alliance with his people, an alliance that has to be lifelong to the moment of the end of life? Or us allowing the life of God to live in us, making an alliance with the excluded. The origin of the word religion is that of connection, belonging, and religious life is a covenant relationship with God's abused and neglected people, as well as each other, one's fellow monks. This sounds all very romantic, and bells of worry and concern therefore begin to sound in the Christian's head. Except to effectively to enable a wounded life to develop is a complex work of different professions, e.g. mental health professionals, addictions professionals, abuse counselling, ongoing support to retain housing and employment. This move, therefore, towards professionalism in lay communities and away from the notions of ego loss was one of the crises that some communities faced in the 1990s. How do we be professional and yet not live for ourselves? Therefore, the meaning of permanence and persistent in terms of love's call to leave everything behind as a disciple grows into a different meaning in the wider communities of work that we are called to. And we become types of Benedictine in this sense, rooted and grounded in the developing life of our workplace. The Franciscan charism of moving from place to place in the spirit of Christ's homelessness and exile. Jesus saying, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head in Matthew 8:20 being particularly relevant. That call, that living of that life of constantly moving, is harder to place in our hearts, but can be lived as openness to go where divine love calls us, a wandering that can be in the home, when, for example, the behavioural cry of an adolescent child bewilders us, drives us out to new places of the Spirit in our parenthood. The meaning of all this is the rushing, living waters of love in facing and recognizing our emptiness, or at the clanging cymbals of our human neediness. Perhaps our vocation lies in the silence after the fall of the heart's city walls, in the eternal and sometimes cradle silence, in the face of our restless, anguished soul chatter. In community life, we are utterly dependent on God. So be it. Alleluia. Amen.